Ladies and gentlemen, I want to speak to your heart today, not just your mind, but your heart, because I believe with all that is within me that somebody listening right now is on the edge of giving up. You've prayed, you've waited, you've cried silent tears, and you're wondering, God, do you even see me? But let me tell you something, yes, He does. And He's saying to you today, clearer than ever before, my child, don't you give up. You see, the Lord never promised that the road would be easy, but He did promise He would never leave you nor forsake you. When life gets hard, and it will, God's voice doesn't shout in panic. It whispers in peace, and today, through every word of this message, I believe God wants to speak into your spirit and say, I am not finished with you yet. So, stay with me. Open your heart, because this is not just a speech. This is a word from the Lord. Trusting God's timing can be one of the most challenging aspects of faith. In a world that values immediacy and quick results, waiting on God's timing often feels counterintuitive. We live in a culture of instant gratification where everything is available at the touch of a button. Whether it's a text message, food delivery, or even entertainment, our society has conditioned us to expect things immediately. So, when God asks us to wait, it feels foreign and sometimes frustrating. However, this act of waiting is not passive. It is an active expression of trust in the Creator of time. God's timing is not just a matter of when something happens, but also a matter of how it happens. We may see the situation from a limited perspective, and in our eyes, the answer might seem delayed or even out of reach. But God, in His infinite wisdom, sees the bigger picture. He understands the purpose behind every delay, every detour, and every moment of waiting. What may seem like a setback is often a preparation for something greater that we cannot yet comprehend. There is a powerful truth in knowing that God's delays are not His denials. When He calls us to wait, it is often because He is working behind the scenes, orchestrating things we cannot see. Think about it. Just as a gardener doesn't rush the growth of a tree, God does not rush the growth of His children. If a seed is planted too quickly or forced to grow faster than it is meant to, it will not bear the fruit it was designed to produce. Similarly, when we go through seasons of waiting, it is God's way of nurturing us, refining us, and building our character to withstand the blessings He is about to pour out. The challenge comes when we are faced with uncertainty. Waiting on God. Timing often means stepping into the unknown. It can feel like standing on the edge of a cliff, not knowing when or how the next step will come. But here's the thing, God's timing is perfect. He is never late. It might not always align with our desired timetable, but it will always be right. Our impatience comes from our limited perspective, but God sees the beginning from the end. The Bible reminds us in Isaiah 55, 8-9, that for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Waiting also helps us to grow in faith and dependence on God. In our culture, we are taught to be self-sufficient, to rely on our own strength and abilities. But trusting God's timing is an invitation to surrender our need for control. It teaches us to lean not on our own understanding, but to trust in the One who holds the future in His hands. This surrender is not a sign of weakness but of strength. A strength that comes from knowing we do not have to figure everything out on our own. There is a deep peace in trusting that the One who created the universe is in control of our lives. Sometimes it feels like the waiting period is a test of our faith. We wonder if God has forgotten us, if He's too busy with others, or if He's even listening to our prayers. But let's remember, God's silence does not equate to His absence. In fact, often in silence, He is doing a deeper work in us. He is teaching us to trust not just in the outcome but in His character. When we wait on God, we are trusting that He knows what is best for us, and that His plans are far better than anything we could have imagined for ourselves. Furthermore, trusting God Timing means understanding that not every prayer is answered in the way or at the time we expect. Sometimes God's answer is not yet or wait, and while this may feel uncomfortable, it is in these moments that our faith is refined. We learn patience, perseverance, and, most importantly, trust. Every moment of waiting is an opportunity to deepen our relationship with God and to develop a stronger understanding of His faithfulness. He is shaping us into the people He has called us to be, even when we can't see it. And as we wait, we are reminded that God's timing is always aligned with His love for us. He is a good Father who gives good gifts to His children. He will never withhold what is best for us, even if it means we have to wait for it. Waiting on God's timing is not about being passive, it's about remaining active in faith. It's about trusting in His plan, trusting that His delays are not denials, and trusting that in due season He will bring to fruition the desires He has placed in our hearts. In the waiting, we are not just waiting for an answer, we are waiting for God's perfect will to be revealed. And when it is revealed, we will look back and see how every moment of waiting was worth it. God's timing is always for our good and His glory, even when it doesn't make sense at the time. God sees your struggles. This is a truth that is often easy to forget when life becomes overwhelming. When we're in the midst of hardship, it can feel as though we're fighting a battle alone with no one to understand our pain or our fear. But the reality is, God sees every single struggle. He knows the tears you've shed in silence, the doubts that keep you awake at night, and the battles you fight within yourself. You are never unseen, never unnoticed, no matter how small or big your challenges may feel. One of the most comforting aspects of God's love is His deep understanding of human suffering. He doesn't just observe our struggles from a distance, He empathizes with them. God, in His infinite wisdom, understands what it feels like to face pain, disappointment, and sorrow. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, walked on this earth and experienced the full range of human emotions. He knew what it was like to be rejected, misunderstood, betrayed, and abandoned. He knows the weight of grief and the depth of heartache. And because of this, He is not a distant God who is indifferent to your suffering. He is a compassionate, loving Father who fully understands what you're going through. In the Bible, Hebrews 4:15 says, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet He did not sin." This verse highlights the fact that Jesus, though He was divine, fully experienced the human condition. He faced the struggles we face, and because of this, He is able to offer us the comfort, peace, and guidance we need when we go through difficult times. God's empathy isn't abstract or distant, it's personal. He feels what we feel, and He responds to our pain with the utmost tenderness. It is in the middle of our struggles that God is often closest to us. Though we may not recognize His presence in those moments, we may wonder where He is, why He hasn't yet delivered us from our troubles, or why He seems silent. But God's presence is not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's in the quiet moments, the times when we feel like we're at our lowest, that He is the closest. God is with you in the fire, walking beside you through the storm. Even when the waves are crashing over you and the weight of the world feels unbearable, God is right there, offering you His strength and His peace. When you're in the midst of a struggle, it's important to remember that God sees beyond what you see. He sees the deeper purpose behind your pain. We may be focused on the immediate discomfort or frustration, but God is looking at the long-term growth that will come from the experience. Just as a tree needs strong winds to develop deep roots, our struggles help to build the character and resilience we need to become the people God has called us to be. God does not waste a single tear, a single hardship. Every trial you face is an opportunity for growth, and every moment of suffering is part of His perfect plan for your life. It's easy to think that God doesn't see our struggles when we look around and see others seemingly living in peace joy, we compare our circumstances to those of others and feel like we've been forgotten. But this is where faith comes in, faith that even when we can't see the bigger picture, God is working behind the scenes. Psalm 139:2 says, "You know when I sit and when I rise, you perceive my thoughts from afar." God is intimately acquainted with all of our ways. He knows every moment, every thought, every heartbeat, and every tear we shed. There is nothing about our lives that escapes His notice. Moreover, knowing that God sees our struggles should bring comfort and hope, especially when we feel like no one else understands. We live in a world that can be judgmental, dismissive, and quick to offer advice without truly listening. But God doesn't treat us that way. He listens with compassion and responds with love. His response to our struggles is not condemnation or frustration, but grace and mercy. When we turn to God in our times of need, He doesn't dismiss us or tell us to get over it. Instead, He invites us to come to Him just as we are, with our pain, doubts, and fears, knowing that He is the one who can heal, restore, and give us strength. In every struggle, God is also using the circumstances to mold and shape us. Sometimes we don't understand why we're going through a particular hardship, but God is working in us in ways we can't always see. It may take time for the purpose behind the pain to become clear, but in the meantime, God is refining us. In 1 Peter 1:7, it says, "These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed." Just as gold is purified by fire, our faith is strengthened through the trials we face. Each struggle is an opportunity for us to trust God more deeply, to rely on His grace, and to experience His faithfulness in new ways. God's understanding of our struggles is not limited to sympathy. He is a God who acts. He responds to our pain with power, wisdom, and love. He is not merely a distant observer. He is a helper, a comforter, and a deliverer. No matter what you are going through, know that God sees you, He understands you, and He will never leave you to face your struggles alone. Strength comes from perseverance, and perseverance is something that is often forged in the furnace of trial. In life, we often face obstacles, setbacks, and difficulties that can feel insurmountable. It's easy to become discouraged when things don't go as planned, when the road gets tough, and when the challenges seem to multiply. But it's in these very moments, when we feel the weakest, that God is doing the deepest work in us. Perseverance is not simply about enduring. It's about enduring with faith, with hope, and with the belief that the struggles we face are shaping us into stronger, more resilient individuals. Perseverance is a quality that is developed over time. It's not something that can be acquired instantly or without effort. It comes through repeated experiences of standing firm, of continuing to move forward even when the path seems uncertain. James 1:3-4 tells us that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. This verse reveals that perseverance is essential for spiritual maturity. It's not just about surviving difficult times, it's about allowing those times to refine us, to make us more complete, and shape us into the people God has called us to be. Through perseverance, our faith is strengthened and we grow in character, wisdom, and endurance. When we face challenges, it's tempting to want to give up, to walk away, or to quit. The pain of the struggle often feels unbearable, and the temptation to turn back is strong. But it's in these moments that perseverance makes all the difference. It's when we refuse to quit, when we keep pressing forward despite the obstacles, that we begin to experience the strength that only God can provide. The Apostle Paul speaks about perseverance in Romans 5:3-4, saying, "We also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance. perseverance, character, and character, hope. This verse reveals a powerful truth. Suffering, though painful, is not in vain. It produces perseverance, which in turn produces character and hope. When we persevere through trials, we not only grow stronger, but we also develop a deeper sense of hope, a hope that is anchored in God's promises. Strength through perseverance is not just about enduring hardships in isolation. It's about leaning on God for support, for guidance, and for strength. When we try to face struggles on our own, we often become overwhelmed. But when we rely on God, when we allow His strength to carry us, we discover that we are capable of far more than we ever thought possible. Isaiah 40:29-31 assures us, He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. This passage reminds us that our strength comes from God. When we trust in Him and place our hope in Him, He gives us the strength to keep going, no matter how difficult the journey may be. Perseverance also teaches us to endure without grumbling or complaining. It's easy to become frustrated when things don't go as planned, when things take longer than expected, or when we face setbacks that seem unfair. But God calls us to endure with a spirit of patience and trust. Philippians 2:14-15 encourages us, "Do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation." This command may seem difficult, but it is part of the process of perseverance. As we endure, God is teaching us to respond with grace, to hold our peace, and to trust Him even when we don't understand what is happening. Our attitude during times of struggle speaks volumes about our faith and our trust in God's sovereignty. Perseverance also requires a vision of something greater than the present moment. It's about looking beyond the struggle and seeing the purpose that God has for our lives. When we only focus on the pain of the moment, it's easy to become discouraged. But when we keep our eyes fixed on the hope that lies ahead, we are empowered to press forward. Hebrews 12:1-2 tells us, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith." The race that we run in life is not a sprint, it's a marathon. It requires endurance, focus, and a clear vision of what is to come. When we fix our eyes on Jesus, we are reminded that the struggle we face now is not the end of the story. There is a greater purpose, a greater reward, and a greater glory waiting for us. When we choose to persevere, we are also choosing to trust that God is with us every step of the way. He is not distant or indifferent to our struggles. He is walking with us, strengthening us, and carrying us through the difficult times. 2 Corinthians 12:9-10 tells us, "But He said to me, My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong." This verse highlights the paradox of perseverance. It is in our weakness that God's strength is made perfect. When we lean into God's grace and allow Him to work through us, we discover a strength that is not our own but is found in Him. The journey of perseverance may not always be easy, but it is always worth it. As we press forward, we are being refined, strengthened, and prepared for the greater things God has in store for us. And through it all, we can take comfort in knowing that God is faithful. He will never leave us or forsake us. As we endure with perseverance, we are not only growing stronger, but we are also drawing closer to the one who gives us the strength to persevere in the first place. God's plan is bigger than your struggles. This is a truth that can be difficult to grasp, especially when we are in the midst of trials. When life throws challenges our way, it's easy to become so consumed by the problem at hand that we forget to look at the bigger picture. We see only the struggle, the difficulty, the pain, and we may wonder how something good can come from it. But God, in His infinite wisdom, sees the whole story, past, present, and future, and He knows exactly how each moment of hardship fits into His greater plan for our lives. One of the most comforting aspects of God's plan is that it is not limited by the constraints of time or human understanding. While we might only see the immediate challenge, God sees the outcome. His view is eternal, and He is working in ways that we cannot fully comprehend. What may seem like a setback or a detour is often part of the journey that will lead us to a greater purpose. Romans 8:28 reminds us of this truth, and we know that in all things God works for good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Even in the hardest moments, when it feels like the world is falling apart, God is working behind the scenes, weaving together all the pieces of our lives into a plan that will ultimately bring about His good purpose. God's plan for our lives is not always about comfort or ease. In fact, the Bible often speaks of the refining process that happens when we go through difficult times. Trials are not just random occurrences or obstacles. They are opportunities for God to shape us, to strengthen our faith, and to prepare us for the future He has planned. In 1 Peter 1:6-7 we are told, "In all this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed." This passage shows us that suffering is not meaningless. It is a process of refinement. Just as gold must be refined by fire to remove impurities, our faith is refined through the challenges we face, strengthening it and making it purer. Sometimes the struggles we face are not for our benefit alone. God uses our trials to prepare us for something greater, something that will have an impact beyond our own lives. The Bible is filled with stories of individuals who went through unimaginable struggles, only to later realize that those hardships were part of God's plan to equip them for His greater purpose. Take Joseph, for example. He was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned. But through all of this, God was working behind the scenes, preparing Joseph to become a ruler in Egypt and ultimately save his family from famine. Joseph himself later recognized this when he said to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Genesis 50:20. What seemed like a series of tragic events was actually part of a divine plan that was much larger than Joseph could have ever imagined. Similarly, God may be using your current struggles to prepare you for a greater purpose, even if you can't see it yet. Another important aspect of God's plan is that it is built on His love and care for us. Even when we can't understand why we are going through a particular trial, we can trust that God's plan is rooted in His love. He knows what is best for us, and He desires to lead us into a future that is filled with hope and promise. In Jeremiah 29:11, God says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." This verse reminds us that God's plans are always good, even when the path to that good is difficult. When we face struggles, we can take comfort in the fact that God's ultimate plan for our lives is to bring us into a place of blessing, peace, and purpose. Sometimes God's plan may involve us stepping out of our comfort zones or going through seasons of uncertainty. These times of change and transition can be unsettling, but they are often the very spaces where God does his most transformative work. Think of Abraham, who was called to leave his homeland and go to a place that God would show him. Genesis 12:1. Abraham didn't know exactly where he was going or what the future held, but he trusted God's plan. His obedience opened the door for God to fulfill incredible promises in his life. Similarly, when we step out in faith, trusting that God's plan is bigger than our current circumstances, we open ourselves up to the incredible opportunities he has prepared for us. It's also important to remember that God's plan is not just about the destination, but about the journey itself. Our struggles, our triumphs, our growth, and our challenges all shape us into the people God wants us to become. The journey is where God reveals his faithfulness, his provision, and his love. As we walk through life, we are learning to trust him more deeply, to rely on his wisdom, and to experience his presence in ways that we might never have known if everything had been easy. In Romans 5:3-4, Paul writes, "Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope." The struggles we face are not just stepping stones to the future, they are integral parts of the process of becoming who God has called us to be. As we navigate through life, it's crucial to keep in mind that God's plan for us is not just about achieving success or reaching a certain goal. It's about becoming the people he has created us to be, people who reflect his love, his grace, and his glory. The challenges we face are often the very things that shape us into individuals who are more compassionate, more patient, more understanding, and more dependent on God. God's plan is ultimately about our transformation, becoming more like Christ and fulfilling the unique purpose he has for our lives. And though the road may be difficult, we can trust that every step is leading us closer to the person God has always known we could be. God's timing is perfect. This is a truth that can be hard to embrace, especially when we find ourselves in seasons of waiting, uncertainty, or frustration. When things aren't happening as quickly as we'd like, or when doors seem to close despite our best efforts, it's easy to become discouraged and question whether God is really in control. We may wonder why we're facing delays or why the answers to our prayers aren't coming as quickly as we expected. But the truth remains, God's timing is always perfect, even when it doesn't align with our own understanding of time or our personal timelines. One of the fundamental truths about God's timing is that he operates outside of our limited understanding of time. As humans, we are confined by the clock, always measuring our lives by hours, days, and years. But God, being eternal, sees everything from an infinite perspective. In 2 Peter 3:8 it says, "But do not forget this one thing, dear friends, with the Lord a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day." This verse reminds us that God does not view time the way we do. What may seem like a long wait to us is nothing in the grand scheme of God's eternal plan. He is never in a rush, and he doesn't operate according to the same pressures or limitations we face. His timing is not delayed, it is always exactly as it should be. When we find ourselves waiting on God, it can be tempting to try to rush the process. We may try to push things forward or take matters into our own hands in an effort to speed things up. But God's plan for our lives is never hurried, and neither should our trust in him be. Psalm 27:14 tells us, "Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord." Waiting is not passive, it is an active act of trust and patience. When we wait on God, we are not just sitting idly by, hoping that something will happen. We are actively choosing to trust that he is working behind the scenes, even when we can't see the progress. In those times of waiting, God is developing our character, strengthening our faith, and preparing us for the next step in His plan. While we may be focused on the immediate, God is looking at the bigger picture, and He is aligning everything perfectly for the right time. One of the reasons God's timing is perfect is because it is always connected to His greater purpose. God doesn't just act randomly or on a whim. Every decision He makes is part of a larger divine plan. In Ecclesiastes 3:1 we read, "There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens." Every season of our lives has a purpose. Even when things don't make sense to us, God is orchestrating every moment in accordance with His divine will. What we see as setbacks or delays are often just God's way of preparing us for something even greater that is yet to come. If we receive everything we want on our own timeline, we may miss out on the fullness of what God has in store for us. Consider the story of David in the Bible. David was anointed to be king as a young man, yet he didn't take the throne right away. Instead, he spent years fleeing from King Saul, facing danger, and being prepared for the leadership role God had promised him. During that time, David could have become discouraged, angry, or frustrated with the delay, but instead he learned valuable lessons about patience, trust, and reliance on God's timing. When the time was right, David was ready to step into his role as king. God's timing for David was perfect, even though it involved waiting, hardship, and uncertainty. Another aspect of God's perfect timing is that it allows us to be fully prepared for what lies ahead. When we ask God for something, we may not always be ready to receive it when we want it. Sometimes we need more time to grow, to develop, and to mature. God knows when we are truly ready, and He will not give us something prematurely, knowing that we may not yet have the strength or wisdom to handle it. In Galatians 4:4 it says, "But when the set time had fully come, God sent His Son, born of a woman, born under the law." This verse speaks to the perfect timing of Jesus' arrival on earth. At just the right moment in history, God sent His Son to fulfill His plan of salvation. If Jesus had come at any other time, the world might not have been ready for the message He brought. Similarly, when God acts in our lives, it's at the perfect moment when we are ready to receive His blessing, answer, or direction. In addition to this, God's timing allows for the unfolding of His purpose in ways that are beyond our comprehension. Sometimes, the delays we face are not about us at all. They may be part of God's plan to bring others into His kingdom or to prepare circumstances in ways we can't yet see. In the story of Joseph, for instance, it wasn't just about Joseph's personal journey, but about God's plan to preserve the nation of Israel. Joseph's rise to power in Egypt was part of a larger story that affected not only his family, but also the future of an entire people. God's timing was perfect, and the delays Joseph faced were integral to the fulfillment of God's plan. God's timing is also perfect in the way it brings about growth in our lives. When we face delays, waiting periods, or unanswered prayers, we are given the opportunity to grow in patience, trust, and dependence on God. James 1:4 encourages us to let perseverance finish its work so that we may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. God uses times of waiting to refine us, to help us grow in our faith, and to teach us to rely on Him more fully. It's in the moments of waiting that we learn to trust God with our future, knowing that His plan is far better than anything we could orchestrate on our own. When we finally see the fulfillment of God's promises in our lives, we will often look back and realize that His timing was exactly what we needed, even if we couldn't see it at the time. Our waiting wasn't in vain, and the delays were actually part of God's perfect plan to bring us to a place of greater blessing, understanding, and peace. God's promises are unwavering, and they stand firm no matter what challenges or uncertainties we face. This is a truth that can bring deep comfort, especially during times of doubt and fear. When we are faced with difficulties, it can feel as though everything around us is uncertain, but one thing remains constant: the promises of God. He is faithful to fulfill every promise He has made, and His Word is a sure foundation on which we can build our lives. Understanding and embracing God's promises is essential for enduring through life's trials, because they remind us that we are not alone and that God's plan for us is good, no matter how things appear in the present moment. One of the most reassuring aspects of God's promises is that they are rooted in His character. Unlike human promises, which can be broken or changed, God's promises are unchanging. The Bible tells us that God is not like man, that He does not lie or change His mind. In Numbers 23:19 it says, "God is not a man that He should lie, nor a son of man that He should change His mind. Does He speak and then not act? Does He promise and not fulfill?" This verse highlights the certainty of God's promises. When God speaks, He acts. His promises are always fulfilled, and they are based on His integrity and faithfulness. This means that no matter what happens in our lives, we can stand firm on the assurance that God will do what He has said He will do. God's promises cover every aspect of our lives. Whether it's a promise of provision, protection, peace, or guidance, God's Word is filled with assurances that He will never leave us or forsake us. In Philippians 4:19 we are reminded, "And my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of His glory in Christ Jesus." This is a promise that God will provide for us in every season, whether we are experiencing abundance or facing a time of lack. It's not just about physical provision. God promises to provide for our emotional, spiritual, and relational needs as well. In every circumstance, we can trust that God's provision will be sufficient because He is faithful to keep His promises. In times of difficulty, it can be easy to forget that God's promises are still true, even when our circumstances seem to say otherwise. But it's important to remember that God's promises are not dependent on our current situation or on our feelings. They are not subject to the ups and downs of life. His promises are eternal, and they are true regardless of how we feel or what we see with our natural eyes. 2 Corinthians 1:20 reminds us that for no matter how many promises God has made, they are yes in Christ. Every promise God has made to His people is fulfilled in Jesus Christ, and through Him we have access to all of God's promises. This means that even when we are going through difficult times, we can stand on the assurance that God's promises are still in effect. One of the most powerful promises of God is His promise to be with us always. In Isaiah 41:10, God assures us, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." This is a promise that transcends every trial, every challenge, and every fear. God is with us in every moment of our lives, and He is actively working to strengthen and help us. Even in the darkest moments, we are never alone. God's presence is a constant, and His promise to be with us brings peace and assurance in the face of uncertainty. The promises of God are also a source of hope for the future. No matter how hard things may seem in the present, we can hold on to the promise that God has a good future for us. Jeremiah 29:11 declares, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." This promise is a reminder that God's plans for our lives are always good, and that He is working everything together for our benefit. Even when we don't understand why things are happening or how the future will unfold, we can trust that God's plan for us is filled with hope. His promises are an anchor for our souls, giving us confidence that the best is yet to come. God's promises also bring strength during times of weakness. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, God tells Paul, "But he said to me, My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." This promise of God's grace in our weakness is one of the most profound assurances we can hold on to. When we are feeling weak, inadequate, or overwhelmed, God's grace is enough. His power is made perfect in our weakness, and through Him we are able to do far more than we could ever accomplish on our own. This promise reminds us that we don't have to rely on our own strength or ability. God's strength is sufficient for every challenge we face. The promises of God also give us peace, even in the midst of turmoil. In John 14:27, Jesus promises, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." The peace that God offers is not like the fleeting peace the world offers. It's a peace that transcends understanding, a peace that guards our hearts and minds even in the midst of chaos. This peace is not dependent on external circumstances. It comes from knowing that God is in control, that He is faithful, and that His promises are true. When we hold on to God's promises, we can experience a deep and abiding peace, even when everything around us seems uncertain. Finally, God's promises are an invitation to trust in His faithfulness. When we face challenges, it can be easy to doubt, to wonder if God will truly come through. But every promise in Scripture is an invitation to trust God more fully. Trusting in God's promises means choosing to believe that He will do what He has said He will do, even when we don't understand how or when it will happen. Proverbs 3:5-6 encourages us, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." Trusting in God's promises requires us to lean not on our own understanding or timing, but to rest in the assurance that He is faithful and true. When we do this, we find that God's promises become a firm foundation that we can stand on, no matter what challenges life brings. When life gets tough, and it feels like giving up is the only option, remember that God is telling you to keep going. His promises are unwavering, His plan is bigger than any struggle, and His timing is perfect. Even in the midst of hardship, we are never alone. God's presence is with us, His strength is made perfect in our weakness, and His love surrounds us. Whatever challenges you face, hold on to the truth that God is faithful, and He will see you through. Trust in His process, lean on His promises, and know that no matter how difficult the journey may seem, He is working all things together for your good. Don't give up, because the story He is writing in your life is far greater than anything you could ever imagine. Keep moving forward, for the victory is already secured in His name.